And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760 on the GMAT. My name is Rajat Sudana, one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Along with me, I have Sandeep Edu. Sandeep is a GMAT strategy expert, and he's going to be our co-host today. The goal of this webinar is to help you do three things. One, to help you create a study plan to get to your target GMAT score, whether it's a 740 or a 760 or a 700, and the study plan that we aim to create is something that's right for you. That's the most efficient way for you to get to that score. The second is to help you understand how does the GMAT actually work? What does it test? The GMAT being a computer adaptive test and a test of ability requires a slightly different approach than your typical test would require, which is such as the GRE or the CAT or a few other exams. So we're going to look at what is the GMAT test and how does it work, so that you can leverage that to modulate your preparation. And then once you have a study plan, once you understand how the test works, we're going to talk about the core skills that you need in every aspect of the test, such as the quant or verbal or IR or AWA, to get to that 760 score, and how can you track that as you study more and more, you're improving on those core skills, so that the more time you put in, the more you improve. So it's primarily a strategy focused webinar, and to a certain extent an application focused webinar. Um, we do solve a couple of questions here. Not a whole lot, but a couple of questions, and one of them is on boldface. So we do send this boldface video lesson your way, so that you have some sort of a background on that particular question type. If you have not gone through this video lesson, I recommend that you go through it. This is a part of your free trial. The moment you log into the e-GMAT account, you should be able to see this video lesson. Also, we have some upcoming free webinars. We have an upcoming free webinar on GMAT sentence correction. It's probably our most popular webinar. In this webinar, we talk about how can you ace GMAT sentence correction by focusing on meaning and logic. That's next Saturday, and then we have another free webinar on how to ace number properties questions on the GMAT. And again, in both these webinars, we look at a unified approach to solving the easiest to the most challenging questions in the respective subsections. Okay, this is a free webinar. It's fairly heavily attended, and to make sure that we're able to do justice to this group over here, we ask a couple of leading questions. One of them is, when do you plan to take the test? The second is, what's your target GMAT score? So we have quite a few responses for the first question, and based on the data, what I can really see is the majority of you, or I shouldn't say majority actually, the biggest segment over here plans to take the test in about 46 to 75 days. That's about a month and a half to 2.5 months. We also have a fairly large number of people who haven't taken their data as of yet. And then we have three equally sized segments: those who have their exam right away, those who have between 16 and 30 days, and those who have between a month and 45 days before their test. Now, with regards to the target GMAT score, there a majority of you want to be in that 730 to 750 bracket. It's very, very popular. And upwards of 20% want to get to that 760 or higher score. So when I look at this group over here, fairly ambitious, more than 75% of you want to aim for a score of 730 or higher. And only about 5% of you or so are in that 600 to 700 bracket or so. Okay, with that, let me go right into what we call as the webinar pane. So the screen will have or will be in the process of changing for you. Let's wait for another 5 seconds or so to allow for the screen to change for you. If you are in parts of Asia or Australia or so on and so forth. Let's do a poll over here. Can you guys see GMAT strategy session as on your display with my my photograph, as well as the agenda which says key strategies to score 760 on the GMAT. All right, perfect. There's essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to do a brief introduction to e-GMAT. That's going to be about 15 minutes. Then we're going to go into the core of this webinar, and we're going to talk about how can you get to that 760 score. That's going to be for about an hour and 45 minutes or so. And then if you still have questions that have not been answered during this time, we would have an open-ended Q&A towards the end, in which we will answer any question that you have pertaining to your GMAT strategy, pertaining to any aspect of quant or verbal, or even stuff such as choosing the right business school and so on and so forth. With that, let's go right into the first part of the webinar, which is an introduction to e-GMAT. So early on, I asked, hey, what's your target GMAT score? And upwards of 75% of you said you want to get to a score of 730 or higher. And so clearly about 80% of you want to get to a score of 720 or higher, considering that there was a significant number of people in the 710, 720 bracket as well. Now, statistically, only 6% of the people get to that score. And that's despite the fact that median scores at top B schools, they keep on going up, and then you can really see some of these stats. These are early stats from 2018, and so what is it that people who get to those scores do? A good percentage of them use e-GMAT. Why do we say that? When you look at two stats, which is the number of verified reviews or the number of success stories, what you're going to find is that e-GMAT accounts for more than more verified reviews actually than most of these other major prep companies combined. And then you'd see that consistency when you look at the review section of GMAT clubs or be the GMAT. Similarly, when you look at success stories which have been submitted over the last 12 months, what you're going to find is that more success stories mention e-GMAT than do mention all of these other three prep companies combined. So what makes our students more successful than students from other prep companies? If there's one thing that makes our students more successful, it is our approach to GMAT preparation. So when you think about our approach to GMAT preparation, or what we call as the architecture of learning, what you're going to find is that if you research all the courses out there, and in general, learning architectures that are prevalent today, you're going to find two very predominant architectures. One is what we call as the book-based architecture, and the second is this private tutor-based architecture. When you look at all the other courses that are out there, even though they provide audiovisual instruction, they provide quizzes, they provide video lessons, what you're going to find is, despite providing all of that, their dominant architecture is built around that book-based approach. When you look at e-GMAT and evaluate it against one of these two architectures, what you're going to find is that e-GMAT's built a lot more around that private tutoring-based approach. So let's see, why is it that one architecture is more successful than other in helping you ace the GMAT, and then why do we say e-GMAT's built around this private tutoring-based approach? To do that, let's take a case study, or let's just kind of look at how do you get to a score of 720 or higher. The first thing that you need to do to efficiently get to a score of 720 or higher is to really create that path towards your goal. Once you know how are you going to get to that score, then you need to make sure that you fill the gaps by learning the concepts and learning how to apply those concepts. And once you've learned how to apply those concepts, then you need to really get so good at applying those concepts or attain a level of mastery that puts you in that top 6 or top 4 or top 1 percentile of students. So let's see, how does a book-based approach attack this problem. Then we'll start with study plans or so. So when you start studying using a book, a book-based approach is all about autonomy. So when you study using a book, you get a bunch of study plans, and you have to choose which study plan applies to you. Beyond those 2 or 3 templatized study plans that are given to you, there's really very little scope to customize that study plan to your strengths or to your weaknesses. Then you start learning concepts after choosing a certain study plan. And even though books do a really good job of teaching you concepts, just their very static nature is not very conducive to telling you how well you've learned the concept. When 1,000 people read a chapter in a book, they learn to 1,000 different degree. How many of them learn to a degree that is satisfactory or enough to move to that next chapter? It's something that a book won't tell you. That burden of validation is completely on you as a student. Now, one area where books, again, because of the static nature, don't do a very good job is when it comes to teaching how to apply those concepts. Just books are not very well suited to telling you, hey, this is what you do in step 1 while solving a problem. This is what you do in step 2. This is what you do in step 3. So people who study using books, they resort to practicing hundreds and hundreds of questions, and the best and the brightest do master application, but others have to go through this process multiple times to be able to reach a level of mastery that puts them in the 720 score or so. And then when it comes to evaluation of mastery, the only tool that a book-based approach provides is a mock test. So people who follow that book-based approach resort to taking 10 plus or even 20 plus mock tests. And even when you take a mock test, that onus of evaluation is completely on you. A private tutoring architecture works slightly differently. When you work with a private tutor, the first thing that a private tutor would tell you is that, hey, he'll evaluate your strengths and weaknesses and create a personalized study plan that's based on your strengths and weaknesses. And that personalized study plan will contain, this is what you need to study, this is how long you need to study, and this is how good you need to get at in a certain subsection or so. Once you have that study plan, and that creating that study plan is about a 2 to 3 hour exercise because it involves fairly exhaustive evaluation, a private tutor then starts teaching you concepts in the area that you need to learn them. And while you're learning concepts, a private tutor would give you feedback on the areas that you still need to work on. One area where a private tutor based approach differs the most is teaching you how to apply those concepts. When you work with a private tutor will tell you exactly how to approach a problem. What do you do in step 1? What do you do in step 2? And so on and so forth. And as you're solving problems, a private tutor constantly evaluates your extent of mastery and tells you when can you move from one topic to the other. So what's the difference between these two approaches? While you're learning the same content, the extent of personalization, the extent of feedback, the extent of learning application is a lot more in this private tutor-based approach. So let's see, why do we say that most of the other courses are built around this book-based approach, whereas e-GMAT is built around this private tutoring-based architecture? And we're going to take a case study of someone who wants to go from a score of 600 to a 720. And the reason why we take that is because a good number of you are in that bracket, and where you're looking for a score improvement of 100 points or higher, and essentially where many books can help you get to a 50 to 70 point score improvement, especially when you are around the 600 score. But when you want to get to that higher score, it's then that books struggle. So remember, the first part over there was to create a personalized study plan. So how do e-GMAT create a personalized study plan? The first thing that they do is they go to a tool called GMAT Planner. That's an AI-driven utility that empowers everybody to build their personalized study plan. So let's see how does this utility work. It starts with taking your current score. So over here in this case, what you really see is the student has entered his current quant and verbal scores over here. Where do you get these quant and verbal scores? You actually get these scores from one of our mock tests called a Sigma X mock. Then it gives you a recommendation of how would you get to your target score. Over here, the target score is at 720, and it tells you you should aim for a Q50 and a V38. Now, if you want to change that recommendation, you're welcome to do that. And since this is an AI-driven utility, the moment you change your target quant score, this is automatically adjusted. So when that happens, then it tells you how can you get to a certain quant and a certain verbal score. So let's assume we take the Q50 and a V38. It'll tell you how can you get to a Q50, how can you get to a V38, and this is done based on your starting scores on verbal subsections and quant subsections. So there's a neural engine that's running here that recommends the shortest path to get to that Q50 as well as a V38. So when that happens, your GMAT preparation is a set of 5 different milestones. You have your starting abilities in arithmetic and algebra, or sentence correction, or critical reasoning, and then you have your target abilities. So what you need to do when you're studying sentence correction or arithmetic is to really say, I want to start from a 50 percentile and I want to aim for a 90th percentile or 89th percentile, as is written over here. So when this happens, your effective preparation is a set of these 5 milestones, 3 in verbal, 2 in quant, and if you hit those milestones, you can be very certain that you're going to hit that 720 score. It then tells you, based on your starting abilities and your ending abilities, how much time it thinks you'd need to get to this. So these are your starting abilities, these are your target abilities. Now, one of the things that's really, really important to recognize, which a lot of people do not, is the thing that I want to get to a 720 score. But when they read these abilities, so let's say an 89th percentile in SC or an 83rd percentile in arithmetic, what they forget is that these are comparative abilities, which means that you need to get so good in sentence correction that you are among those top 11 percentile of students. So you need to get so good in arithmetic that you are among those top 17 percentile of students over there. And it's that recognition that allows you to put in that effort, allows you to be careful while studying. Juhi says, how do we get that current score? That's a great question, Juhi. So there are 2 ways of getting that current score. One is if you take an official test today and you get an ESR, and an ESR will give you these abilities. The second way is if you take a free mock test that we provide. It's called a Sigma X mock, and it gives you each one of these 5 abilities. So these are the only 2 mock tests, only 2 tests in the world that provide these abilities. So again, you can really see when this happens, these are the milestones that you're aiming for. And your GMAT preparation actually becomes a set of 5 different mini preparations. And these are milestones that you can aim for, you can focus on. If you hit those, you actually hit that 720 score. Again, it can also tell you when can you take the test based on a certain starting score, a starting date, and a certain investment of time on weekdays and weekends. And it can generate this calendar for you where you can really see how many hours you study every day. So doing this required a lot of effort. It required a lot of data science. But why did we go about doing this? We created this AI-powered utility so that each one of you can create your own personalized study plan once you take a Sigma X mock in less than 7 minutes. That's all that it takes to create your own personalized study plan. So just let me ask this. Has anyone over here worked with a private tutor? Yes, no? Okay. For those of you who worked with a private tutor, only those, I think, 8 or 9 of you who worked with a private tutor over here, have you gotten a study plan which is as granular as what you see over here? Okay. Very few of you have. So again, this is something which even private tutors struggle to provide. Why? Because this, just to even get to this level of granularity, you need to do a lot of data science. You need to have a lot of data, and we spent upwards of 1,000 hours creating this utility, which looks very simple, but if you dig deep down into it and really say, hey, how does this work? It requires a lot of R&D. So that's just about the study plans. Now, once you have that study plan, you still need to study, learn the concepts that you don't know. You still need to learn how to apply those concepts and get so good that you are among those top 6 percentile of students. So let's see how we teach concepts. Remember, a private tutor teaches you concepts and gives you feedback on areas that you still need to work on. Here's a screenshot of our subject verb module. It's just the subject verb module over here. What you see here is a bunch of video lessons over here. And with each video lesson, we have an embedded evaluation engine. So when you when you spend 30 minutes of studying subject verb must exist, we evaluate you on subject verb must exist right then and there. Uh, uh, when you look at subject verb always singular, we evaluate you right then and there and give you feedback on this. And essentially, which is very similar to what a private tutor would do. Now, how does this compare to one of the other courses out there? And this is a very fairly popular course by Magoosh. And again, you can see the subject verb lessons over here. What you see here is that there's no assessment. This time that you see over here is not the time that you actually spent on the video. It's the length of the video. So the intent over here is to really have a book in an audio visual format. The next thing that a private tutor does is that he teaches you how to apply those concepts. Again, when you see a problem, what do you do in step 1, what do you do in step 2, step 3, and so on and so forth. At e-GMAT, we've created an entity called an application file. We do exactly that and that. Then we have a practice file in which we evaluate your ability to apply those concepts. And then we have a set of official guide questions in which, again, we evaluate your ability to apply those concepts. So you learn how to apply something right then and there. You are evaluated on it, and you're given feedback. And this is how every module, whether it's a quant module or a verbal module, is architected. Dhanraj is a great question. He says, how do we get feedback once you complete the concept? So once you complete the concept, there's an evaluation quiz. This quiz is designed to be progressively difficult. And when you make a mistake, you exactly know which aspect of the concept have you made a mistake in. So if you try some of the concepts in our free trial, you would really see, Dhanraj, how you get feedback. The next piece is to really say, hey, you've learned all of this stuff. You still want to. So how does this compare to the Magoosh course? So again, what you really see is that there's really no focus on teaching you how to apply those concepts. There's just one quiz over here, and that quiz is common not just to subject verb, but also to auxiliary verbs and to pronouns. And there's no score over here. Again, the intent is to give you practice, but not to give you feedback. The next piece is, that evaluation of mastery. You've studied all of these concepts, you've learned application. How do you figure out whether you're among that top 11 percentile of students in sentence correction? And that's something which is very, very important, which is that, hey, I started at this level, I want to get to this level. After studying the course, how do I figure out whether I've gotten to this level or not? How do you do that? We've created a tool which is called Scholarium, in which we have an ability quiz that's dedicated just to sentence correction. You take an ability quiz, you get an ability score, and from there on, you can look at the analytics to really say which aspect of sentence correction are you faltering in. Because the entire course is modular, you can just go back to this module within the course and fix that, come back, take another ability quiz, and track the score improvement. So again, you can really see why we say that most of the other courses out there are built around this book-based approach, whereas we build technology and content that enables us to offer a private tutoring-based architecture. Gopi has a question. He says, how do we know about mitigation of mistakes? What are the ways of communication? There are many ways of communication that you have with us. If you want to understand, if you have a doubt about a subject matter, I can tell you that 99 out of 100 times, it probably is already answered in our course. Every learning activity in our course has its own dedicated forum, and only our experts are allowed to respond to your queries in the forum. So if you have a doubt, you click on that forum, which is right next to it, and based on the feedback that we get from our students, 99 out of 100 times that doubt would have already been answered over there. If it is not, you post that query and one of our subject matter experts will respond to it. So that's how you get subject matter doubts cleared. If you have a strategy doubt, you write to our strategy team. Now, who's created some of this content? 4 out of GMAT Club's top 5 rated instructors have created this content. Instructors who've been ranked a lot more frequently and a lot more highly on GMAT Club. So while only 6% of the people get to that score of 720 or higher, a good percentage of them use e-GMAT. With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. If you want to stay updated with all things GMAT, if you want to stay updated with most of the things that go on in the MBA world, you're welcome to connect with me on my LinkedIn. I have upwards of 12,500 students connected over there. I also have upwards of 500 MBA professionals. When I say MBA professionals, this means admission consultants, admission directors connected with me on my LinkedIn. Okay, with that, we've come to the end of the introduction. Let's get to the core of this webinar, which is how do you get to that 760 score or that 740 score, and so on and so forth. So we'll now get into the score of the webinar. Before that, I have a couple of questions that I address. We help people make personalized study plans? Yes, every student at e-GMAT gets to make a personalized study plan. And how do you get in touch with the GMAT strategy team? Just write to me at rajat@e-GMAT, and one of our strategy experts will help you. Okay, let's start with the GMAT strategy portion of this webinar. So as I said, there are 3 sub goals in this. I want to make sure that each one of you has that personalized strategy for your GMAT score, and you understand how much time we need to allocate to get to your target score. One of the big things that's really important is that you need to have that realization as to the kind of effort you need to put in. I can tell you, having taught upwards of 40,000 students, that about 35% of the people are very optimistic when it comes to estimating the amount of time that they would need to get to a certain GMAT score. The second is the focus on core skills, which is, hey, now that you have a strategy to get to your score, what skills do you need to develop to get there? We're going to look at why are core skills important to get to that score of 760 and how do you improve on this. The last piece which is there is, you have that plan, the core skills. How do you make sure that you're improving on those skills? How do you build that trackable plan over here? So we're going to look at various components of the e-GMAT course and what's the purpose of each of those components and how do you make the best use of it and track your improvement as you're studying along. So overall, starting with a plan to understanding what is important to really tracking the things that are important. Just at a very high level with regards to time investment, the first section is going to be about 30 minutes, the second section about 45 minutes, and the last part about 20 minutes or so. And again, one thing which is there is a lot of people think that they're going to learn some tricks on the GMAT and ace it. It's it's an extremely well designed test. The GMAT is designed such that you can't trick the test. In fact, people who try to trick the test often get tricked. So let's start with one term which we've talked about a whole lot, which is strategy. Let's understand what does this term strategy mean and why do we need one? Hold on, let me get my poll question. So when you think of the word strategy, what comes to your mind? What, according to you, is this word strategy? Okay, time-bound action plan, structure towards goal, a structured plan of action, agenda or plan, efficient plan. All right, so having looked at these many responses, I can really see that most of you understand what the word strategy means. A strategy is a plan of action which is designed to achieve a particular goal. Now, if this is what strategy is, what do you think is a good strategy? What is a good strategy? Effective use of resources. Smart, okay. One that works for you, yes. That gets you your results, okay. One that you can implement, okay. Very, very good. You're actually providing me with some really, really good insights over here. So after you put in your answer, read what others have also written, because we're going to touch upon many of these points. And it's really, really important, even though these points seem fairly high level, it's really important to understand the intent behind these points, because they talk about mistakes that many of us make. Okay. So what is a good strategy? Let's look at this. A good strategy is something that provides maximum benefit with least input. And how it does it is by capitalizing on your strengths and overcoming your weaknesses. Let's kind of understand this term over here. So what is maximum benefit? What does this word benefit means? Benefit in the context of GMAT means score improvement. A lot of people say, hey, it's the target score. No, it's the score improvement. It's the delta between your current score and the score that you eventually get, or the delta between your current score and your target score. Now then look at this term called least input. Now least input doesn't mean less input. It means compared to all the other options, this input is less. Okay, it still may be 100 hours or 150 hours depending on how much score improvement you're looking for. But this particular approach that you're following is requires the least amount of input. All the other approaches may require 200 hours or so. And just a principle of a good strategy is that it always focuses on capitalizing your strengths first and then spending time to overcome your weaknesses. Now, there are certain hallmarks of good strategy. You know, the first is it's goal driven. A strategy for a 760 is going to be very different than a strategy for a 700. How you study to get to a 760 would be very different from how you study to get to a 700. Then it always starts with an analysis of where you currently are as well as your current strengths and weaknesses. Now, let me ask a poll question. How many of you over here are studying using, when you started studying for the GMAT, went to a friend of yours and really said, hey, asked him, how long did it take to study for the GMAT? And if the guy said 2 months, you assume that you're going to take 2 months to get to a similar score as well. If he said 4 months, you assume that you're going to take the same amount of time to get to that as well. So how many of you kind of more or less took your friend's study plan and assumed that that's going to work for you? Let's get in some poll answers over here. This is a very, very important question, probably the most important question that might determine whether you get to your target score, whether you get to your dream B school or not. How many of you, more or less, adopted your friend's study plan without adapting it? Okay, let's get a few more responses, guys. I have 150 students here. I only have 50 odd responses. Let's get at least 80 responses. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. About 35% of you did that. Now, don't get me wrong. It's wonderful to have someone who's been through this ordeal called the GMAT and done well over. Then it's really, really valuable to have that. But the problem in taking someone's strategy and assuming that that it's going to be your own is that that particular person may have a different set of strengths than you do, and hence may require a different amount of emphasis. That particular person may not have as taxing a job or as taxing a spouse or as you do, and hence can spend a lot longer on studying for the GMAT every day than you do, or vice versa. Okay. The other piece which is there is that when it comes to assumptions, one of the things that's really, really important is there are certain people who are very good at learning new things, but there are others who have a certain amount of inertia when it comes to learning new things. And then each one of you has had this 20 plus years of learning history. So when you think about learning for the GMAT, and if you've been out of learning for at least 2 to 3 years, make sure you bring those assumptions in, because you are going to bring that inertia with you when it comes to learning. So with that, having a goal, having an analysis of your current situation, putting these assumptions into account, uh, you can really look at how to plan, and once you create a plan, then you can start executing on it. Now, some of you may be confused. In fact, many of you may be confused over here. You say, hey, I don't see a plan here. I only see issues, and there are more issues that I need to address than I thought I would need to. And then that is true. There are more things that you need to take into account while defining your strategy than you initially thought. But what's important is that you need to be aware that these are issues that you need to address as we move forward into this webinar, because once you become aware of those, you can put them in your plan, and once you put them in your plan, as you execute it, you're going to have a much higher likelihood of success. But the thing that I want to make sure that you realize is that a good strategy is very personal. You can't just take anyone's strategy and assume it's going to apply to you. And you need to spend time creating that strategy, and you need to have those checks and measures in place to ensure that you are moving in the right direction. The other piece that I want to talk about is this term called a percentile. What is percentile? Very simply, it's your relative rank out of a population. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this term is because even though many of you know this term, you don't understand that term. I just saw a question which really said, hey, what's the difference in preparing for a score of 700 versus that score of 760? The difference is a score of 700 is 88th or 89th percentile, whereas a score of 760 is 99th percentile. So when you're preparing for that score of 760 and you're assuming, let's assume you're studying number properties, you want to make sure that you learn it so well that you are amongst that top 1 percentile of students. Whereas if you're aiming for a score of 700, you could actually learn it only up to a 70th percentile, because if you know the other subsections in quant really well. So it's a very big mindset difference when it comes to preparing for a 700 versus a 740 versus a 760. And that mindset has to be taken in, you've got to take that mindset every day into your study schedule, into your study session, so that you excel to that degree. A 760 guy or a person who targets a 760 score has to study has to stay a lot more focused while studying the same stuff. And just to really put this in a bit more context, when you think about a score of 760, but if 250,000 people take the GMAT every year, what you're really saying is that if I'm aiming for a 760, I'm going to be amongst that top 2,500 students who take the GMAT, and I'm going to be better than 247,500. If you're going to aim for a 700, you're going to be among those top 30,000, or you're going to be better than 220,000 students. And that's a piece that you need to understand. It's the GMAT is not your school test where 30% of the class got a 95% score. That is not the GMAT. It's a comparative test, or what I call as a zero-sum test. When you get a 760, it means by definition someone else doesn't, because it's a comparative score. The two other terms that I want to talk about, one is accuracy. What is accuracy? It's the percentage of questions. When you take a 10-question quiz, if you get 8 out of 10 questions correctly, that's 80% accuracy. What is ability? Ability is when you take a quiz, it's your percentile in that particular quiz, or if you were talking about a section, it's your percentile in a section. Note, you can get 80% accuracy in a quiz, but your ability could still just be 50th percentile if half the people who take the quiz get 8 out of 10 correctly. The key takeaway that I want to make sure you understand is that when it comes to the GMAT, it's your percentile that is your true measure. Okay, so before you start preparing, one of the things that you need to really do is you need to define what's your target quant score, what is your target verbal score. And what I'm going to do is, at a very high level, I'm going to do that definition for 3 different segments of students. The first segment of student is what I would call as a quant, where someone who's really, really strong in quant. The second segment of student is someone who's strong in quant but not so strong that they would call themselves a quant whiz. And the third segment of student that I'm going to take over here is someone who's not strong in quant. So if you're strong in verbal but not strong in quant, put yourself in this particular segment here. If you're not strong in either quant or verbal, put yourself also in this particular segment over here. So again, remember, these are breakout scores for a score of 700. So if you're a quant whiz, make sure you leverage your strengths first. So aim for a Q50, Q51, and which means you only need to improve your verbal to a V33, V34. If you're someone who's strong in quant but not a quant whiz, aim for a Q49. Accordingly, you need to get a slightly higher verbal score. If you're someone who's not strong in quant, you may be strong in verbal or you may not be strong in either quant or verbal, make sure you make verbal your strength, because if you're not strong in quant, and if you look at the verbal and quant curriculum, what you're going to find is that the verbal curriculum is a lot more confined. It's a lot more easy to improve on verbal. So improve on verbal first, and then accordingly improve your quant score enough to get to that 700 score or so. So Rudran says that the number of and configuration of easy, medium, and difficult questions changes if you set a target score of 700 versus 760. Absolutely. It does change. You're going to get a lot more difficult questions, Rudran, if you're aiming for a 760, and if you're actually scoring of 760 than you would get if you're scoring a 700. And you're going to see some of those examples in the upcoming slides. In fact, you're not likely to get a single easy question if you're scoring a 700 or a 760. So some of you may be asking, hey, if I have to study both quant and verbal, why does it matter whether my strategy is quant driven or verbal driven? It's actually a very big question. It's probably the second most important question that you should ask. And there are 2 big reasons for it. First is efficiency. If you're strong in quant and if you leverage your strengths, you're going to find that getting to that score you'll get a lot faster to that score if you leverage your strength completely. The second is confidence. If you start with your strength, and if quant is your strength, you study quant and you should be done with it in 10 days, if that indeed is your strength, then you would know that you're already done with half your preparation. I mean, you already got until a Q49 or so in quant. You know that, hey, quant's taken care of. For the remaining 30-35 days, I can focus completely on verbal, and that focus will help you improve faster as well. Also, if you take a mock test after let's say 15 days of preparation and your quant's already done, you're going to find that you're already at a 650 if you're aiming for a score of 740, 750 or so, and that 740 would not seem so further off if you still have 30 days. On the other hand, if you study verbal, you put in 30-40 days, you're only done with verbal, and you say, man, I'm still 70 points away and I have my exam in 10 days. It's not such a nice feeling. So not everyone's aiming for a 700. Many of you are aiming for a score of much higher. How can you get to that score? Just go to gmatplanner.com and move forward from there. And if you need your starting scores, take a Sigma X mock. Again, make sure you understand the screenshot. Make sure you understand these time spans. We can actually even help you personalize this even further as to really say, how should you go through the e-GMAT course? How should you evaluate whether you've actually gotten to these ability levels or not? So a lot of people think, hey, if you get to a 680, 690, 700, that's enough. Beyond that, if you want to get to a top B school, it's your application that matters. I'm going to talk about some stats which will prove that such is not the case. The first is an article. It's about a 5-year-old article now. And what this article really says is, the title of the article is, on B school test, Americans fail to measure up. So the crux of this article was that because of increased participation by students from India and China, uh, what's happening is that Americans are not able to get as high scores on the GMAT as possible, and so they're not able to get they were not able to get as many scholarships as they used to. So what B schools did was they asked the GMAT for a separate ranking for Americans, or actually a ranking by country, and so on and so forth. So, and it has some very interesting implications for Asians. We're going to really talk about why that is the case. So, here are some excerpts from these articles, which really says, to address those concerns, what are the concerns? Hey, Americans aren't scoring as high. GMAT in September introduced a benchmarking tool and this was September of 2014, that allows admission officers to compare applicants against their own cohort, filtering scores and percentile rankings by world, region, country, gender, and college GPA. So they can really do all of this today, and they do all of this today. Uh, Sarah Nair, who is the Assistant Dean of MBA Admissions at Darden, said she was among those who contacted the GMAT for help. And she said, I need to be able to show my scholarship committee, which includes faculty, that this person is in the top 5% of test takers in his region, even though that individual might not rank highly against test takers worldwide. So, what are certain things that you really get to know? When it comes to top schools, GMAT's really important for admissions. The second is you now compete against others in your region, which means that you need to excel in both quant and verbal. The third thing, something that we already knew, but in 2014 it was said for the first time, that when it comes to scholarships, your GMAT score plays a huge role. It's actually one of the two determinants when it comes to scholarships. Someone asked a question that says, if I'm an Indian, I take a test from Canada, will I be considered an Indian or a Canadian? You'd be considered an Indian. You can't game the system this way. You can take the test from Mars. You'd still be considered an Indian if you have an Indian passport. Here's another stat which was compiled by folks on GMAT Club. This stat is based on data from 3,000 students who posted their scores on GMAT Club, and what you can really see is the probability of admission based on uh, 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 based on your GMAT score. And what you can see is that as you go from a score of less than 700 to a score of greater than 750, at top schools, your probability of admission actually goes as high as 50%. I'm also a member of e-GMAT. In fact, we were sponsors of e-GMAT last year. And what is e-GMAT? e-GMAT is an association of graduate admissions where the top test prep companies, top admission consultants, as well as admission directors from top business schools, we get together for a week and we talk about issues related to admission. The admission directors tell us about what kind of student body are they looking for, what are the new MBA courses that they're introducing, what enhancements are they doing uh, overall, and so on and so forth. So we also get a lot of insights about what are they looking for, or if they've changed their application, what was the driving factor over there. So has certain aspects that I have from that conference with regards to GMAT. Multiple GMAT attempts. A lot of people are really worried about multiple scores showing up. Most schools are actually fine with 3 attempts, and they really say, in fact, uh, the admission director of Columbia Business School, he even said that. He said, "Hey, if I see a low score and then I see a high score, what it tells me is that this guy's a really motivated individual. He doesn't take no for an option. He doesn't take failure. He takes failure very well into his stride and is motivated to do well." One of the other guys really said, "Hey, if you've applied to a school and then if you've improved your GMAT score, let us know. If you've been waitlisted, definitely work on improving your GMAT score." And again, one of the other admission directors said, if you've been waitlisted, you have a 4-month span. What else can you do in that 4-month span? If you're going to apply to GSB Chicago, NYU Stern, if you're going to apply to Harvard, if you're going to apply to Wharton, make sure you get to at least a Q47. Why? Otherwise, they worry about your ability to take on the course load. Certain schools, not every, will not even look at your the rest of your application if you are from a competitive applicant pool. And again, schools confirmed that your GMAT score has a huge impact when it comes to scholarship. In fact, when it comes to scholarship, there are only two factors that matter. One is what's your GMAT score? The second is how well did you do in the interview? How much does the school love you based on how well you did in the interview? So, what kind of schools participate and what kind of test people from the test prep world and admission consulting world participate, you can really see over here. In fact, folks fly down from across the Atlantic to attend this conference. So last year, or rather in the year 2018, this conference was hosted by GSP Chicago, Kellogg, and Ross. The year before that, it was hosted by Stanford and Berkeley. The year prior to that, it was hosted by MIT and Harvard. So top B schools actually host these conferences. Now, this was some statistical data. I'm going to actually give you some anecdotal data right now. Here's an example of a student. His name is Victor McCullough. This is me, by the way, a couple of years ago, who scored a 770. Now, the reason why I like this case study is that, he received full fellowship from many schools, including Ross and Keene and Flagler, as well as an admit from Wharton. Took the GMAT 4 times, he improved his verbal score from V31 to V44. A non-native, an African, improved, scoring 98th percentile on the GMAT. It is probably the highest score in his country. The guy was an e-GMAT and applicant lab student. The reason he was able to get to that V44 was because he used data to understand his weakness and improve upon it. And he used data from Scholarinium to do that. Overall, he spent less than $600 on his GMAT preparation and an MBA application, and received more than 200 grand in fellowships. Here's an example of another student. His name is Kong Bui, who scored a 760. Now, here's the link of his video interview. What you'd really see as you watch this interview is that this guy does not have perfect English. Yet, he was able to get to 760. And not just that, he received 4 full fellowships. Now, there are very few people who get a scholarship or a fellowship, but there are even fewer people who actually get paid to study. This guy is getting paid $1,700 a month to study at Ohio Fisher. Okay. So again, 4 full fellowships. So in addition to this, he also received 3 other full fellowships. He's currently studying at Ohio Fisher. I mean, who wouldn't, if you get paid to study? Again, as you watch his interview, what you're going to find is the guy has no extracurriculars. He doesn't speak perfect English. The only reason why he got these scholarships was, or rather, a couple of reasons why he got these scholarships was he got this amazing score, and he did the basics right when it comes to his interview as well as his application. Here's another student. Her name is Prithi. She took the GMAT 5 times. She took the GMAT course in her 5th attempt. Now she's someone who never thought about scoring higher than a 680 or so. But in her last attempt, she surprised herself by getting a 740. She received multiple scholarships from various schools. Her dream school was Kellogg, but with a 650 or so or 620 or so, which she had prior to this, she couldn't even think about it. But with a 740, she got an admit from Kellogg. That's where she's currently studying. And this last example is it's a rare story is of a student who received admits from not just one, but pretty much every school she applied to. Mansi scored a 770 on the GMAT. She got admits from Harvard, Stanford, Kellogg, Wharton, and INSEAD. And again, If you look at her debrief, what you're going to find is this one quote. She says, "I firmly believe that you should have your own customized strategy as per your needs. While you can learn from other strategy, you should make your own. And over the course of preparation, be flexible enough to adapt that strategy." When you click on this link, and I'm going to give you the PDF, but when you click on this link over here, what you're going to find is a study plan, which she's planned across about 3 months, and you're going to really see how she has focused study sessions with an aim to hit a certain percentile in each and every subsection, very similar to what we talk about over here. Now, a lot of people are also interested in her application experience, and she worked with one of her partners, Maya Review, for her B School application. And Poonam at Maya Review was kind enough to allow us to share this post as well, which also includes Mansi's interview with regards to her application experience. In fact, 2 weeks back, we conducted Mansi is currently studying at Harvard, and we conducted a 1 year interview with her in which we talked about what's happening at Harvard and again her B School application overall. So again, you saw statistical data. People who get to a high GMAT score, in fact, we get to a 740 plus, 750 plus score, really the high probability of getting admits from Wharton, Kellogg, and so on and so forth. We also saw anecdotal data where people have done it, they've received scholarships and fellowships, etc. So what are the benefits of a high GMAT score? So the many benefits of a high GMAT score. One is when it comes to admissions. If you aim for a certain school, you get to that school. That's at least $500,000 impact over a 10-year period. If you're aiming for Harvard, you get to Harvard. You'll have that energy that you take into the school, and over a 10-year period, you're gonna really see that you're gonna do a lot better. When it comes to scholarships or fellowships, a GMAT score is one of the two criteria that they look for. And it could easily have an impact of 120, 130, 140K. So we talked about Mansi earlier. Mansi has about a 45% scholarship from Harvard. That's an impact of about 80K right there. Imagine studying at Harvard and getting 80K scholarship. If you want to work in consulting, if you want to work in corporate strategy or corporate marketing, the person interviewing you will most likely have a high GMAT score. And if you have a GMAT score in the vicinity of his GMAT score, you'll have that respect even before you walk into that interview room. Okay, and that respect is priceless. I've experienced it myself when I worked in the corporate world. As you go there, you get that additional chance to prove yourself. Why? Because the person thinks if you have that GMAT score, you deserve to express yourself fully. And if you want an insurance with regards to, hey, if the MBA doesn't work out for me, there's always the alternate career of being a GMAT expert, and that's very, very lucrative. So, what are the benefits of a high GMAT score? Really high return on investment. It gives you confidence wherever you go. You can really put it front and center. And even though it stays with you, even though that score is valid for just 5 years, it stays with you forever. So, we understood the importance of the test. Let's understand how you ace this test. And again, we're going to resort back to this thing of accuracy versus ability. What is accuracy? Accuracy is the percentage of questions correct regardless of difficulty level. What is ability is your comparative performance in a particular subsection or a section. Okay, so to understand how the GMAT works, let's take a look at this. Richard says, what should be my target GMAT score if I'm aiming for a full scholarship and I want to study at a top B school in India? Richard, unfortunately, B schools in India have very limited funds for scholarships.
Even if you get a top score, you're going to get admission, but scholarships, no. They don't have the money. B schools in the US, B schools in Europe have money. I mean, B schools in the US put aside last year in the year 2018, which is when we last have this data from. And Sandeep would be happy to share a few articles that we wrote. They spent about $440 million in giving away scholarships. B schools in Europe spend about $60 to $70 million giving away scholarships. So, but in India, they don't have the money. It's just India works very differently. And again, I don't want to give you false hope. It's just, if you were to really ask me that question about the US, I can really tell you. In India, the only people who I've seen ISB reward a scholarship to are either who belong to a special category or those who are expats. And we know that because ISB used to come to us and really say, if you have students from who are expats who want to study at ISB, here are some scholarship options for them. So how does an adaptive test work? So to do that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna simulate an adaptive test. Now the GMAT doesn't exactly work like this, but it works on the same principle. So whatever I'm gonna talk about over here is gonna really apply to the test. On the y-axis over here, what we have is the difficulty level of question, and on the x-axis over here, we have question number from 1 to 6. So we're going to simulate the GMAT experience, or an adaptive test experience to be more accurate, for two students, student 1 and student 2. Student 1, or case 1 as is written over here, gets the first question. Remember, the first question is always around that median difficulty level. He gets that right. Then he gets the second question. He gets that right as well. Then he gets the third question, which is of an even higher difficulty level. Remember, the higher we go on y-axis, the more difficult a question becomes. Let me actually clean this up a bit more so that then he gets the third question, he gets that wrong. Then he gets the fourth question, which is of a slightly lower difficulty level. And how do you know it's of a lower difficulty level? If you draw horizontal lines from question number 3 and question number 2, you'd see the fourth question is between those horizontal lines. So it's of a slightly lower difficulty level. He gets the fourth question right. Then he gets the fifth question, which is of a higher difficulty level. He gets that wrong. Now student 2 or case 2 gets the first question, again medium difficulty level, gets that wrong. Gets the second question, lower difficulty level, gets that right. Gets the third question, slightly higher difficulty level, gets that wrong. Gets an easier question at position number 4, gets that right, and then gets the fifth question right as well. Now, if I were to stop the test at question number 5, who do you think, if I were to stop the test over here, who do you think would have a higher score? Case 1. All right, pretty much everyone saying case 1. Why is it that case 1 will have a higher score even though both of them have answered 3 out of 5 questions correctly? What do you mean by higher ability? All right, I have 20 plus answers. Let's get to 30 answers. Let's get a few more responses. 29. And guys, because I'm not sharing the results, as you put in those responses, I'm getting those responses. So don't worry that you can't see what you put in. 31. Okay, we have 30 responses. Let me broadcast results over here. So a lot of you say answer difficult questions, answer tough questions. Level of difficulty, that's perfect. Yes, that's exactly the case. Even though both these students got 3 out of 5 questions correctly, what you would find is that case 1 got 5 questions which were either at the average difficulty level. This was the only question that case 1 got, which was at the average difficulty level or above the average difficulty level. Case 2 only got the first question, which was at the average difficulty level. And that's why, despite 60% accuracy for both students, this guy got a much higher score. Now, tell me one thing. Did student 2 or case 2 as is written over here, did he even get the opportunity to answer difficult questions? Were difficult questions even served to this guy? No, they weren't served to this guy. Not at all. Why did the test not serve difficult questions to this guy? Okay, because he got the medium questions wrong. Perfect. Because of the adaptive test. And that's something which is really important to understand over here. When it comes to an adaptive test such as the GMAT, you have actually 2 challenges. The first challenge that you need to overcome is to make sure that the test serves difficult questions to you. The second challenge that you need to overcome is to make sure that you're able to answer them correctly. Why? Because if you're able to answer difficult questions correctly, only then will the test serve difficult questions to you. Now, one other piece, which is something that you'll also see in our Scholaranium, is that a difficult question gives you 3x as many points as an easy question, which is really important to understand. A lot of people forget this. One of the other inferences that you can draw from here is, because for this particular guy, the test is lowering the difficulty level. Because for this guy, the test is lowering the difficulty level. If you make mistakes, the test in some ways will try and serve questions to you that you can answer correctly. Okay, so in other words, the test will try and try and help you get to what we call as a local maxima of your accuracy. So the test, the adaptive testing, the question picking algorithm over there will try and maximize your accuracy to a certain point. Does that make sense to you? If you make mistakes, the test starts to serve easier questions. So what it tries to do is it tries to increase or hit what we call in the algorithm world is to get to a local maxima of your accuracy. Okay, does that make sense? Can I get a few more yeses? Okay, even if it doesn't make complete sense to you, if it somewhat makes sense to you, say yes over here, because what I'm going to show right now is actual data from the test. And the reason why I want to show this is because on the GMAT, when you measure your accuracy and really say, hey, I've done better in this test because I've gotten more question right, that can be a smoking screen. That can be a smoke screen. Why? Because measuring accuracy on the GMAT is not a great thing. Why? Because two people with identical accuracy can have very different scores. Let's look at that. So what you see over here is a verbal attempt of 2 students, and you see the verbal section when it used to have 41 questions, which is before middle of last year. And I like those attempts. Why? Because the GMAT gave us a lot more analytics than what it gives us now. Now, even though the verbal section now only has 36 questions, the algorithm essentially has not changed. So what you see over here is verbal attempts of 2 different students. These are GMAT prep attempts, and at that point when the GMAT used to give a lot of diagnostics with GMAT prep, which have stopped giving right now. What you see is that there's really very little difference between these two students if you look at question numbers 11 to 41. Both of them have made 11 mistakes between, or 9 mistakes between question number 11 and 41. The only difference over here between these two students is that student number 2 over here got the first two questions wrong. Okay, can you see this? There's really no difference in otherwise between these two students. Now, when you look at their verbal scores, what you're going to find is that they're very different. These are official scores. Okay, student 1 got a 97th percentile on the GMAT. Student 2 got a 65th percentile on the GMAT. And 97th percentile, if you assume 250,000 people take the test, is a rank of 7,500, whereas a 65th percentile is a rank of 87,500. Now, a lot of people look at this and really say, oh my God, the GMAT's a really harsh test. 2 mistakes and I have 80,000 students ahead of me. How many of you are thinking like that? Okay, if you're thinking like that, then you're thinking very incorrectly. And I'll tell you why. What's surprising is the same students who think, man, I got to get 2 more questions wrong, and then I put in 80,000 students. What they don't realize is that you could still hit a 97th percentile despite making 9 mistakes. Right? You could still hit a 97th percentile despite making 9 mistakes on the test, which is very rare. Now, the key thing to really understand is, and that's where that model of the test is really powerful, is let's just simulate these two attempts on a model over here. And let me just clear this slide. Okay, we have a much more clean canvas to work with. So we're going to start with student 2, the guy who got the first 2 questions wrong. Student 2 got the first question. The first question is of a medium difficulty level. He got that wrong. Then he got the second question, which is of a 30th percentile level. He got that wrong as well. Then he got the next question, which is of a 15th percentile level. He got that right. Then he got question number 4, which is of 20th percentile level. He got that right. Then he got question number 5, again 35th percentile level. Got that right. Question number 6, 45th percentile level. Got that right too. Student 1, on the other hand, got the first question 50th percentile, got it right. Second question 70th percentile. Third question 80th percentile. Fourth question 90th percentile. And then he continued to get those questions right. Now, if you get a 50th percentile question right and a 30th percentile question, a 50th percentile question wrong, we're going to talk about student 2, and a 30th percentile question wrong, then the test over here is actually correct to think that you're not a very smart guy, right? For those of you who are mathematical wizards here, can you tell me what is the probability that a 90th percentile student will get a 50th percentile question wrong and a 30th percentile question wrong, one after the other? What is the probability that a 90th percentile student will get a 50th percentile question wrong and a 30th percentile question wrong, one after the other? It's extremely low. It's less than 1 in 10,000. It's not 1%. 1% is a very high probability. It's actually less than 1 in 10,000. And at this point in time, the test is not very wrong to think that hey, this guy isn't a very smart guy. And so it serves questions which are of a 15th percentile, then 25th percentile, then 35th percentile, then 45th percentile over here. And so the test is working in a very logical fashion. So when you look at accuracies, you just can't, and on a computer adaptive test, you just can't look at accuracies and make judgment. You have to go one level deeper to understand that difficulty level. Now both these students are e-GMAT students, and this is, even though this is GMAT prep data, I also have their actual scores on the test. This guy on the actual test, both of these scores were a week before their actual test. This guy got a V44. This guy got a V35. So the GMAT prep scores were actually a fairly good indicator of what their actual scores were. So the key thing which is over here is, GMAT's a test of your ability. That's why you see the title over here, that it is a test of your ability. When it comes to the GMAT, you have to really look at, hey, how many difficult questions did I get, and how many of them did I answer correctly? Now, in a couple of slides, you're going to really see, you're looking at accuracies over here. In a couple of slides, you're going to really see how the GMAT looks at these students. So this was GMAT prep data, or what is now called the official GMAT mock data. I'm going to really show you official GMAT data as well. This is a student who improved from a score of 520 with a verbal score of 17 to a score of 710 with a verbal score of 40. And what you see is when he got a V40, he got a V40 because he excelled in sentence correction. Actually, my annotations are off. 94th percentile in sentence correction, and he did really, really well in critical reasoning and reading comprehension. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because this guy has been kind enough to share his ESR with us, which you can get at this URL. Now, when you look at his ESR attempts, what you're going to find is that he was able to get to a V40 despite making 12 mistakes. Here is his ESR. Now, the reason why he was able to get to a V40 despite making 12 mistakes was because he did the first part pretty much all correct. He did the second part, most of it right. And by the time he got to the third block of questions, and which is around the question number 20 or so, the test was serving extremely difficult questions to him. And he started making mistakes over there, and you're going to make mistakes if the test serves difficult questions to you. But because he had already proven to the test that he has a high ability, even making mistakes over here did not impact his score very much. In fact, in his last block, he got half the questions wrong, and he was still able to get to a 91st percentile on GMAT verbal. So again, understand how an adaptive test works. And it's an adaptive test is not a test of accuracy, it's a test of ability. If you have high ability, and if you can solve difficult questions, it's very easy to ace the GMAT. I'm talking about this is because a lot of people focus on timing. A lot of people focus on, hey, I'm going to get as many questions right as possible. Here's an example of a student. He didn't get everything right. He didn't focus a whole lot on timing, but he focused on showing the test that he has that ability. Aniket is asking, what are these 4 sections? These aren't 4 sections. These are 4 blocks of questions. So what happens on an adaptive test is it makes decisions in many stages. So with every block of question, it has to make a decision. What is the best estimate of your ability? And these are the 4 blocks when it makes those decisions. Okay. I have seen many questions over here where people are saying, hey, does this mean that the first few questions are really important? And the short answer is yes, they are very important. But the long answer, which a lot of you are thinking, is that hey, I'm going to spend a ton of time. I'm going to make sure that I get those questions right by spending a lot of time on them. That is the wrong approach. Why? Because the first few questions are also going to be of a median difficulty level. And if you truly are aiming for the 90th percentile, you should be able to solve them like this, because the 90th percentile student should be able to just sail through the median difficulty questions. The other piece which is there is ability and timing are 2 independent concepts. If you don't have the ability to solve a particular question, you can spend a ton of time on that, and what you're going to find is that you won't be able to you won't still be able to solve the question. You either know a question or you don't know a question. Spending more time has very little impact on increasing the probability of you solving a question correctly. So just timing would not do it. You have to build that ability. Anupam has a question. Is there any influence of SC accuracy in other sections? No. Each of these sections is scored independently on the GMAT. So you can get a 5 percentile in SC and get a 95th percentile in CR and vice versa. So the key to acing the GMAT is to prove to the test that you have high ability, and then once you've proven to the test, you can still make mistakes and get to a high score. Now, do you remember these guys over here where the difference in accuracy was just 2 questions? Okay, now you looked at these two students through the lens of accuracy. How the GMAT looks at them is through the lens of ability. And the V43 guy had these ability scores that you see over here, whereas the V32 guy has these ability scores. And when you look at them through the lens of ability, can you see that these students look very, very different? They're very different now, right? A 95th percentile in CR is very different from a 66th percentile in CR, or an 87th percentile in RC is very different from a 59th percentile in RC. So that's what the GMAT measures. Gopi says for quant and verbal, at what time can we expect very difficult level? It's Gopi, how it depends on how you do in the first block. If you do really, really good in the first block, the second block would be very difficult. If you get 2 wrong in the first block, the second block would be difficult, but not very difficult. So again, remember, it's an adaptive test. It adapts to your performance. Okay. So the key thing that I want to make sure that you remember is that when it comes to acing the GMAT, it's about building ability. And all of these other things which is there, hey, time management, exam strategy, choosing which questions to attempt, they're important, but not as important as ability, not even remotely important, as important as building ability. Okay, now how many of you have taken a non-adaptive test, which are such as the Indian equivalent of the GMAT, which is the CAT or the GRE? How many of you have taken that or are aware of it? Actually, let me just put in a yes/no poll question. How many of you have taken a non-adaptive test such as the CAT or the GRE? Okay, let's get a few more responses. Okay, about 60% of you are aware of this. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this over here is a lot of people who study for a non-adaptive test, they bring the same studying methodology to an adaptive test and they falter big time. And we'll talk about this. So the Indian equivalent of the GMAT, which is the CAT, is a very popular test. And what happens, or same thing in the GRE as well. The non-adaptive test, you get a bunch of questions and you get more questions than you can answer. And some of those questions are easy, the others are medium difficulty level, and a few questions are hard. So the key to acing the test is to first solve easy questions, then solve medium difficulty questions, and then if you have time left, move towards the hard questions. So the key to acing the test, in other words, becomes selecting the right question. Is that correct? For those of you who are worrying about who studied for the GRE or who studied for the CAT, that's what happens. you have to focus on question selection, because you can choose which question to answer and which question to not answer. When it comes to the GMAT, you don't get that choice. You have a question served to you, you've got to answer it right then and there. Otherwise, you can't move to the next question. On a non-adaptive test, every question has the same marks. The test doesn't adapt, which means solving easier questions is much better, because an easier question is going to give you as many marks as a difficult question would. On a computer adaptive test, difficult questions contain 3 times as many points as easy questions do. As we saw from the examples, accuracy is not as relevant. Now, because a non-adaptive test is a test of your test-taking skills, people who ace the Indian equivalent of a CAT or the GRE, they take a lot of mock tests. Why? Because you want to develop an eye to spot an easy question. On the GMAT, what's important is ability. You only need mock tests towards the end to build a stamina towards that 3-hour test. Okay. When it comes to the GMAT, when it comes to the non-adaptive test, not the GMAT, building ability is secondary to question selection. On the GMAT, question selection is not something that's up to you. Building ability is the only thing that you can really do. So if you bring that same approach that you had for the CAT into the GMAT, you're going to falter big time. Why? Because when you study for the CAT, you're taking a mock test every 10 days or so. That's not going to happen with the GMAT. Does that make sense? I mean, do you understand the fundamental differences in the architecture of the test? And those tests serve a very, very different purpose. The GMAT is correlated with your performance at a business school. When it comes to GRE or the CAT, there's zero correlation between how you do in the test and how you perform at B school. And that's statistical correlation. That's not something that I have made up. If you Google this thing, you're going to find that the GRE has no correlation with how you perform at a business school. Sandeep says, does it mean that mock tests are not important other than building stamina? So I think you're asking a very absolute question. Mock tests are important. In other words, if you're not an e-GMAT student, the way most people evaluate themselves is by taking mock tests, which, by the way, in my opinion, is a really bad way of evaluating yourself. But if you are an e-GMAT student, we have so many assessment tools which are much more focused, which give you way more insights, that for you, the reason why you should take a mock test is to make sure that A, you build stamina, and B, your performance that you have in individualized tests can be maintained when you see questions from 3 different subsections. Yes, those are the only 2 reasons why you would actually take a mock test if you're an e-GMAT student. By the way, do you know that our Scholaranium has 1,000+ questions in verbal and 1,000+ questions in quant, and this is outside of our mock tests. That is equivalent of about 15 mock tests over there. Again, this is outside of the 5 mocks that we provide. So the thing which is really, really important is when it comes to the GMAT, what's important is ability. And a lot of people then ask themselves, okay, how do you measure ability? And we built a tool called Scholaranium, which does just that. In Scholaranium, we have 30 verbal ability quizzes and 40+ quant ability quizzes. And the beauty of this system is that you can take an ability quiz, work on your improvement, come back and take an ability quiz that focus just on sentence correction or word problems or algebra or reading comprehension, and track your improvement. 2 questions that people are saying is that, can you do time-based testing? Absolutely. You can create upwards of 1,000 different kinds of quizzes on Scholaranium, timed or untimed. And yes, the difficult questions there are the same as hard questions on the GMAT. The other thing which is there is Scholaranium gives you stats that tell you where to focus next. And here you can really see if you get a 50th percentile ability over here, you can see that your focus needs to be on these two aspects of GMAT sentence correction. So this granular feedback allows you to go back, work on those areas, and come back and really test yourself again to see whether you've actually improved. Here's a student who went from a 590 to a 750 by focusing just on data. She's someone who she's actually going to be starting at EL this year. She wanted to aim for Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, but her quant score was stuck at 35. She had a V36 to begin with, but if you want to get to a 750, you have to improve that even further. Uh, Using data as well as the e-GMAT course, she improved to a Q50 just by using the course, which is our audio visual lessons, which provide feedback every 15 minutes. She improved to Q47. Then from a Q47 to a Q50, that improvement came through Scholaranium. And it's because of this precise targeting as well as the analytics. Scholaranium is the highest rated assessment tool on GMAT Club. Also, when you practice something from Scholaranium, you're going to really see not just super high quality questions, but also the solutions, which are very well detailed. So, what have we talked about so far? We've talked about strategy in the context of the GMAT. We've talked about how can you get a personalized study plan. We also talked about why GMAT's really important when it comes to admissions to top B schools, when it comes to scholarships, fellowships, and so on and so forth. And we've also talked about GMAT and ability. What's still to come? What's the importance of core skills when it comes to the GMAT, and how can students overcome score plateau? Okay. Also, how can you build that trackable plan using the e-GMAT course architecture? So let's talk about this. We just say, hey, what are the core skills that are required if you want to get to that 760 score? And to do that, I'm gonna have you solve a couple of questions. The first question is a quant question. Let me just move this. Let me bring in the answer choices. Here are the answer choices. I'm going to give you a minute and 30 seconds to solve this question. I'm going to mute myself. All right, guys, let's get those responses in. You have just have about 10 seconds overall. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's end the poll and broadcast the results. 65% of you chose choice B. Choice B indeed is the correct answer. Let me ask another question. Just how did you solve this question? Is it by making equations? Is it by number substitution? Or by using a formula? All right, perfect. 95% of you solve this question by making equation. That's wonderful. And so one of the things I can really tell you is that number substitution is probably a more efficient way of solving this question than by making equations. I'm sorry. Then why is it that you solve this question by making equations? Number substitution is probably a more efficient way of doing it. Okay, you have a habit of doing it. It seemed easier. Okay, what else? So again, equation first and substitution, that's there. That's how you did it. Okay, it is a straight approach. Okay, for most of you, and then I will also tell you that even I solve this question by making equations rather than by using number substitution. And the reason for that is that I've been doing this for a very long time. And the moment I really see that Jacob's now 12 years younger than Michelle, what really happens is an equation starts to form in my brain when I really say m is equal to j plus 12. Does that happen for you? The moment you see this, yeah, it's something that really just happens automatically in our brain. Our brain's wired to do this. And all of us understand that, but our brain similarly is not wired to answer these verbal questions. Now, what is this wiring that we talk about? This wiring is what we call as the core skills that we need for GMAT Quant. Okay, some of you are actually telling me in the Q&A pod, and thank you for that, I don't know there's another way that exists. So this wiring that's there in our brain that automatically allows us to form these equations is what we call as that core skills that are ingrained in our brain, and you can really see the solution over here. Okay, now look at this solution, and for those of you who made a mistake, you can also see where you made a mistake. But tell me, what are the core skills that you need to answer a question such as this one? What are the core skills that you need to answer a question such as this one? Okay, let me just clear the poll question over here. Basic maths, you said forming equations and substitutions. Okay, what else? Ability to understand the question and make those equations in the first place. Basic algebra. Okay, good. I can really see that. Some of you are really saying simply plugging in. Yes, that's another core skill, which if you want to follow that approach. But essentially, what you really need are 4 core skills to solve this question. You need to be able to work with algebraic variables. You need to be able to convert statements into equations, relate them, and then solve them. Okay. When you say common sense is nothing but converting statements into equations. And if you teach kids, you'd be surprised how many of them struggle with this. Now, I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and sometimes when I teach kids over here, what I find is that a lot of people struggle with, taking the statement and converting it into an equation, and that's a skill that's if you were to teach it to a 9-year-old, you'd have to break it down to really say how do you build that, how do you translate that statement into an equation. So even though it's common sense, it's still a core skill. Now, how many of you have been studying for the GMAT and have experienced what is called as a score plateau? And let me describe what a score plateau is. When you start studying for the GMAT, you put in the first 60, 70 hours, and then as you study more, what you find is that your score improves. But then after that initial 60, 70 hours, as you put in more hours, your score seems stuck. It doesn't seem to go up. Okay. How many of you have experienced that score plateau? Let me actually put in a yes no poll question so that it's a lot easier. So how many of you have what we call as a stuck score, that hey, I'm putting in the effort but my score is not improving? But 70 odd percent of you. Now this is something that you would experience only after you put in about 70 hours studying for the test. But 75% of you have experienced a score plateau. Let me tell you why that happens. Yeah, numbers actually changing, but yeah, but let's call it 80%. So tell me what would happen if the skill that you lacked in is skill number 2, but the skill that you practiced is skill number 4, which is solving equations. What would happen if you did that? If the skill that you lacked in is skill number 2, but the skill that you practiced again and again and again is skill number 4. Skill 2 won't improve. You'll end up with an incorrect computation. You'd reach a dead end. You'd actually have no effect on ability, which is what we call as a situation of score plateau, where you're putting in the effort, you're really making yourself better and better at being able to solve equations, but you won't get more word problem questions wrong. And because of this, your GMAT score won't improve, or your word problem ability won't improve. Someone was saying, how difficult a question is this? This is a 600 level question or a medium difficulty question if you're looking at the scale rating scale on the GMAT. But essentially this is a situation of what we call as a score plateau. And conceptually, does that make sense that okay, if you're doing this, you're not going to see an improvement in your overall score? Now, many of you may be wondering this, saying, okay, I understand these neatly defined core skills exist in quant, but do the same skills exist on the verbal side of things as well? How many of you are wondering about that? Say, I understand quant's this neatly defined section. You have these core skills that exist. What about verbal? Okay. On the GMAT, the quant and verbal sections are very similar when it comes to their dependency on the core skills or how they test the core skills. Similar to the quant section, the verbal section also has a set of core skills, and we're going to really see how the verbal section is very similar by solving a boldface question. But before I do that, I'm going to actually show you something with regards to the verbal core skills, which I learned from a 3rd grade classroom. So again, as I said, I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I have an 11-year-old daughter. But 6 years back, I was looking for a school for her, and the nice thing about schools in the US is that they allow you to go to various schools and see what students are studying in each class. And this is what, as I was touring that school, 3rd graders were learning. These are 3rd graders, remember. In reading comprehension, they were they're reading a passage and learning how to figure out author's purpose, how to do cause and effect reasoning, how to differentiate between facts and opinion, how do you make inferences, how do you get to the main idea, and how do you identify the details, how do you draw conclusions. The strategies that they were using were by making connections, by doing predictive reading, by asking questions against what they've read and by summarizing and visualizing information. And when I read that, I was very, very surprised. And my daughter was not in third grade at that time; she was still in first grade. Um, but it was really, really surprising that that third graders learn these strategies. Now, my daughter right now is in seventh grade. She skipped a grade or so. And I can tell you that she can get an 80th percentile on GMAT RC, not because we have taught her that, but because every kid in her class can most likely get that. It's just they read all of these strategies, they perfect these strategies over the years. How many of you actually did that when you were in third grade or fourth grade or even fifth grade? And these are the core skills that they learn. Now, as I said, we're going to talk about core skills on the verbal side of things. We're going to solve uh, a, a bold-faced question. So I'm going to actually have you solve this question first, and then we're going to solve this question the e-GMAT way. So by the way, Indian education system doesn't suck. It's just that it has a different focus. The advantage that you have in quant is the same advantage Americans, Britishers, and Canadians have on the verbal side of things. So again, here's a bold-faced question. It's not super difficult. It's not super easy. Give yourself about 3.5, 4 minutes to answer this question. I'm going to give you ample time. So don't rush through this. Take it slow. All right, guys, another 30 seconds, get those answers. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. So, can you guys tell me why did we solve this question? I just want to make sure that the objective is very clear in your mind. And you can see how people responded to this question, but can you tell me why did we solve this question? Understand the core skills. Yes, very good. Does everyone remember that? The reason why we solved this question was because we wanted to understand that the core skills and verbal, and to show that that the same core skills or a similar set of core skills exists on the verbal side of things as do on the quant side of things. I am not going to teach you the basics of critical reasoning, and I want to make sure that that's the reason why I asked this question. A lot of people think I'm going to teach a critical reasoning question. They're going to learn something which is going to solve all the critical reasoning problems. You're going to learn quite a few things as we go through this question, but we spend 10 hours teaching you boldface, and that's when you have a foundation in arguments. I can't teach you all of boldface in 20 minutes. So some of you may not understand everything that I talk about over here. And if that is the case, I apologize in advance, and I will tell you, go through the boldface concept and application files in the free trial. But again, the point of what we're going to do in the next 20 minutes is to really tell you the core skills that are tested over here. And you're going to find very neatly defined core skills tested over here. Okay, so let's look at the stats for this question. What you really see is, choices C and D very popular, but choices A and E are also extremely popular. So let's kind of go about this. I have another poll question for you. How did you solve this question? Can you tell me how did you go about solving this question? Eliminated the answer choices. Red looked at the answer choices. Understood the paragraph, used elimination, okay, by finding a relationship. Okay. Use the SC studies of pausing and assimilating to understand meaning. Okay, that's good. All right. So a lot of you did what I call as a classic process of elimination. A few of you tried to follow the fundamental approach, which is to understand what this argument is saying and then move forward. So let's see how we go about solving this question the e-GMAT way. And in fact, I'm actually conducting a boldface session for our paid students tomorrow. So it's going to be a bit of a revision for me as well. So let's see that. So at e-GMAT, how we go about solving boldface questions is that we first read the argument. So in a boldface question, you're going to see an argument, which means you're going to have a passage with a conclusion. We read that passage, we identify the conclusion, and we identify each and every statement in that passage or argument. Then we create what we call as the argument structure. We actually take that one little step forward and really say, answer the question, how is the author arriving at the conclusion? And then what does each statement do with regards to the main conclusion? Does it support the main conclusion? Does it provide context, or does it go against the main conclusion? Then we pre-think the bolded statements. We really say, hey, what are the roles played by the bolded statement? So that's where we go that one level deeper. And after doing all of this, we look at the option and really select the right option. Once you do the first 3 steps properly, the POE, which is the step over here, becomes very easy. Okay, so let's analyze this statement. The first statement says stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue, also called extremely large caps, rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. So what is this statement? It's an observation, it's a data point, it's a fact, it's something which, on the context of the GMAT, you're not going to refute. The author is simply telling you this happens, which means there are these companies called extremely large caps that exceed $100 billion in revenue, and their stock prices over a 5-year period, they rarely beat the market. Then the second statement says, it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. So then the author presents what's called a common thought. Okay. And he says, hey, that this happens because this company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. So there's certain things over here which are very interesting. When you really see that the author says it is commonly thought, one thing which is there is that it's clear that this is not the author's opinion. Now, going forward, the author may say, I agree with this opinion, but just by reading this statement, this is not the author's opinion. It is most likely an opinion of a segment of population, or in general, the opinion of the general population. Okay. Now, when you read a statement, you have to classify it as a fact or a claim. And when you read this entire statement, what you really see is that this is a fact in the context of the GMAT. But when you look at this portion, which I've bolded and also underlined, that portion is a belief or a claim. Now, some of you may be confused. You can say, hey, how is it that this entire thing is a fact when it has a belief embedded in it? How many of you are confused about it? How can a belief be embedded in a claim? So let's kind of look at this, and that's kind of where the fundamental definition is really important. So what's a fact or a claim? What is a fact bucket and what is a claim bucket? When you think about arguments, there are actually 3 buckets there. You have context, you have facts, which actually can be a context as well, and then you have a claim. So the fact and a claim bucket are mutually exclusive. A judgment, an opinion, a conclusion, all of them are a fancy way of saying a claim. Okay, most of the times an observation is a fact, and evidence 90% of the time is in the fact bucket. So you have these terms, and they belong to one bucket or the other. So let's see what is a fact bucket. A fact bucket or a fact is something which, in the context of the argument, you will not question. Okay. What is a claim? A claim or an opinion is what someone thinks, which in the context of the argument is always questionable. And let's kind of understand the difference in a common sense kind of way. When someone says it's 15 degrees outside, it's a factual piece of information. Why? It's a data point. 15 is an absolute value, and you don't really question that. Even though in your day-to-day conversation, when someone tells you this is what it is, you may question that, but on the GMAT, you don't. But if you say it's cold outside, in general, it is an opinion. Why? Because 2 different people may have 2 different interpretations of what is cold. Now, let's kind of look at this piece over here. It's this statement here. According to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard. Now, if this statement were to appear on a GMAT passage or a GMAT CR question, and if you were to evaluate the statement in its entirety, you're going to call it a fact. Why? Because you're not going to question or dispute what Business Week said. Why? Because what the statement is saying is Business Week said that Wharton is better than Harvard. So you're not going to dispute something that Business Week said. Okay, you're not going to say, hey, Business Week did not say that Wharton is better than Harvard. What you will dispute is whether, in your opinion, Wharton is truly better than Harvard or not. Okay. Now, because this entire statement you're not going to dispute, you're going to call this a fact, whereas the bolded part over here is a claim. Can you really see the difference over here? All right. And that's really, really important to understand. It's what can you dispute versus what you cannot. On the GMAT, you're not going to dispute this according to Business Week part, and because of which this entire thing becomes a fact. Similarly, when it comes to this statement, you're not going to dispute whether it's commonly thought or not. You may dispute whether the company truly is too big to grow faster than the overall market or not. So it is commonly thought is a fact, but it has a belief or a claim inside it. Then let's look at the next statement. The next statement says, however, studies show that ELCs that provide higher returns than the market, a majority of them are run by their founders. So you got two other observations or two other data points over here. What are the two data points? The first thing which is there is that there is this group of ELCs that provide higher returns than the market. So there are exceptions to this first statement that exist. Okay. And then there's a characteristic that is common to most of those exceptions, that a majority of them are run by their founders. Then the author says, since most ELCs are run by professional management that is inherently risk averse. Now there's another data point about ELCs that you found out, that prior to this you did not know that most ELCs were run by professional management, or that professional management was inherently risk averse. The study's findings strongly suggest that the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not that they're too big to grow, but rather that they're run by professional management that is too risk averse. So what is this? This is the conclusion that the author wants you to believe. According to him, ELCs can grow faster than the market. The reason why they don't grow as fast is because they're run by professional management, and that professional management is risk averse. It's too risk averse. And if you think about it, if you go a level deeper, this also goes against this accepted belief over here. Is that clear to you? Now you've done 90% of the work. The next step is really important to really create what we call as the argument structure, which is what does each statement do with regards to the main conclusion. And to create that argument structure, what we do is we start with the main conclusion, which is the author's conclusion over here, and then we go forward. Statement number 4, since most ELCs is run by professional management that is inherently risk averse, it's a data point that makes me believe more in the conclusion, so it supports the author's conclusion. Statement number 3, they have two data points. These data points talk about that group of ELCs that beat the market. The author uses these data points as a basis for his conclusion, so they support the author's conclusion as well. Statement number 2 has an opinion in there. So statement number 1 is context, and statement number 2 has an opinion in there which is challenged by the main conclusion. Now take a look at this. This is what we call as the structure of the argument. Is that clear to you? Perfect. Now let's look at the roles played by each of the bolded statements. What is a boldface? What is BF1? A majority of them are run by their founders. This bolded statement is a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend. It is a data point. It is a fact which is provided to support the author's conclusion. Boldface 2, on the other hand, is the reason for the observed trend. Okay, it's also the author's explanation. It's also the alternate explanation that the author believes. Boldface 2 is also your main conclusion. Read boldface 1 and boldface 2. And I'm going to just clear the poll over here and tell me, is that clear? What is boldface 1? It's a fact or a data point which supports the author's conclusion. Boldface 2 is the main conclusion, or it's the explanation that the author favors for this observation. Why is it that this happens? Okay, look at this. I want to see a few more yes. Okay, BF2 is not clear. What about BF2 is not clear? All right. Okay, so with that information, let's kind of look at the answer choices. Choice A, remember choice A was very, very Why alternate explanation? Alternate explanation means another explanation, because there's already an explanation over here, which is this part over here, which is about why ELCs don't beat the market, that they're too big to grow. But that's not the explanation that the author believes. The author believes the real reason why they don't grow is because they're run by professional management, and that professional management is too risk averse. Does that help? Anarga? Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to show you the poll responses over here. Choices A and E were quite popular, and B, C, and D were actually the most popular choices. So let's look at choice A. Choice A says the first is a claim. Remember, the first is a majority of them run by their founders. Is that a claim? Is that a claim? Boldface one, no, it's not a claim. Do we doubt the accuracy of first? Does anyone challenge no, a majority of them are not run by their founders? No, we don't doubt the accuracy of first. Okay. And because of which choice A is incorrect. All right, let's go E for elephant. Okay. I'm going to clear all answers again so that I can see those responses. Choice E says the first provides evidence. Now the first can be an evidence, which is great. Let me actually bring in my. That's fine. A data point or a fact can be evidence to refute something. What's another term for this? An explanation that the argument favors. Can you tell me? What's another term for this part over here? An explanation that the argument favors. What is an explanation? Okay, you're telling me the answer, eventual reason. It's an explanation is actually a conclusion. And who said that? Christine said that. Thank you, Christine. An explanation that the argument favors. So let's read this. The first provides evidence which goes against the conclusion. Now, does the first go against the conclusion? A majority of them run by their founders. Does it support the conclusion or does it refute? It supports the conclusion, and because of this, choice E for elephant is wrong. Even though a number of parts of choice E were correct, because of this word refute, choice E is wrong because the first doesn't go against the conclusion. Now let's go to D for delta. Okay, choice. Okay, why is choice E wrong? Omar, ask this question. Does the first statement, which is a majority of them are run by their founders, sorry about that, right annotation. Does a majority of them are run by their founders, does this go against the main conclusion? Does it make you believe less in the main conclusion? But the real reason why most ELCs don't beat the market is not because they're too big to grow, but rather than they're run by professional management that is too risk averse. And the answer to that is no, it doesn't make you believe. It doesn't make you believe less. In fact, this statement, a majority of them are run by their founders, it gives an example of ELCs that beat the market. Right? So this actually makes you believe in the conclusion, which is why this word refute is wrong. Okay, good, perfect. All right. Can I explain how we say an explanation that the argument favors is the conclusion? That's a great question. An explanation is when you're explaining something, you're actually providing an opinion. And an explanation that the argument favors is an explanation that the author favors. Okay, why? Because the argument's always written by the author. So an explanation that the argument favors becomes a claim or an opinion that the author favors. And in this argument, there's only one claim that the author favors, which is your main conclusion. So that's how it becomes your main conclusion. Now let's look at choice D. Choice D says the first is evidence, and that's good. The first is evidence. As I said, that part is okay. That has been used to support something. What has it been used to support? An explanation that the argument challenges. Can you tell me which explanation does the argument challenge over here, guys? In this argument, which explanation do we challenge? Read the argument once again. That ELCs cannot beat the market. Absolutely right. Who said that? Kalyan said that. Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Kalyan. So does the first support that notion that ELCs cannot grow? Does the first support this notion over here? No, it doesn't support this notion. It actually goes against that notion. Because of this, choice D for delta is wrong. Okay. Now let's look at the correct choice, which is choice C. Choice C says the first is evidence that has been used to support something. What? What is that something? An explanation that the argument favors. What is an explanation that the argument favors? As we said, it's our main conclusion. And as we kind of looked at in our pre-thinking, it does indeed support that. And the second is that explanation. Yes, the second is indeed the main conclusion when you look at the second over here. All aspects of choice C are correct, which is what makes choice C our correct answer. Now remember, I said I'm not going to teach you boldface, but I'm going to tell you what are the core skills that are there over here. So let's look at the core skills that are tested on this particular question. There are 4 core skills that are tested on this particular question. The first one is the ability to classify a statement. Is that statement a fact, a claim, a principle, a belief, or so on and so forth? The second is how does that statement relate to the conclusion or a main point, whether the statement supports the conclusion or it refutes the conclusion or provides context to the conclusion. Then there was the case of relating both the bolded statements and then evaluating the answer choices. The answer choices weren't simple answer choices. You had to decipher each and every element and really see whether it's correct in the context of this argument or not. Okay. So first of all, can you see the 4 core skills over here? And can you see that they're very neatly laid out, as neatly laid out as were the core skills in the word problem questions? Okay. In the word problem questions, what you had was the ability to work with variables. Over here, you have to have the ability to work with different statement types, whether it's a fact or a belief or a claim or so on and so forth. Then it was to convert statements into equations. And over here, the equations is whether something supports or refutes the conclusion or not. Again, relating both the statements and then evaluating the answer choices. Now, where will you learn this? If you are an e-GMAT student, you're going to learn the ability to classify a statement all throughout the course, especially in the premise and conclusion files, as well as the boldface concept files. Where would you learn how do you relate the statement, strengthen, weaken files in our Scholaranium, as well as in the premise and conclusion files? And then where would you learn the various kinds of curveballs that the test is going to throw at you in the boldface practice file, the boldface application files, and our Scholaranium questions, as well as the official guide solutions. Now, when you make a mistake, because you lack a core skill, and here is the data point for that. These are all the incorrect answer choices starting from choice A, and you really see the portions in red are the portions that are incorrect. Choice A said the first is a claim. If you chose choice A, you lack the ability to classify a statement. Okay. And then you also lack the ability to really say the accuracy of which is at issue in the argument, which is you don't understand the logical structure of the argument if you say that if you chose choice A, because you agreed to it that we are doubting the accuracy of statement number 1. Statement number 2 says the first is an objection, choice B, which again is the ability to classify a statement as a fact and claim. An objection is a claim the first was a fact. And similarly, which has been raised against the position defended in the argument, that is your logical structure. If you look at the logical structure, you're going to find that the first wasn't raised against any position that was defended. In fact, the argument doesn't even defend a position. Choice D, which was very popular, this is choice D, again plays on that logical structure of the argument and the linkages between both the statements. And choice E again plays on that logical structure of the argument. Again, what you see over here is when you make a mistake, you make a mistake because you lack in a certain core skill. If you fix that core skill, what you're going to find is that you're going to improve in boldface. Consequently, you're going to improve in critical reasoning and so on and so forth. Whenever you make a mistake, it's because you lack in a core skill. Can you see the direct mapping between core skills and the incorrect aspects of various answer choices? Guys, can you see that linkage between? All right. So let's summarize over here. We are almost towards the end of the session, and I'm going to be sharing the PDF very soon. When it comes to acing the GMAT, you have to first start with planning, where you have to figure out, hey, how much effort you need to put in, how many hours you need, and where you're going to put in that effort. And that's where resources and strategy are really important. Do that first. If you need help, we can help you with that. Then you need to build your core skills. A lot of people think I'm going to study from OG, I'm going to build those core skills. No, the official guide will not help you learn core skills. You need prep resources. In fact, the GMAT already says it's not our job to teach our students the students' core skills. We can give them practice material, but when they engage with us, they really say you guys need to focus on helping them build the core skills. And then the other piece which is there is when you think about tracking your improvement, you've got to measure your ability. Why? Because the GMAT is a test of ability, and you need to be able to assess it every 30 to 40 hours, which is every 2 weeks or so. And you need to be able to use data to isolate upon those weak areas. Why? Because people who get to that 750, 760 scores, people who get scholarships and fellowships, they excel beyond that 700 score only by that isolation. So again, how do you do that tracking? To understand how you do that tracking, I think one of the most fundamental things that you have to understand is how do you get a 760? So GMAT's a very logical test where your overall score is divided into your quant and verbal scores. Both verbal and quant have an equal say in your end score. Then your verbal score is composed of 3 different subcomponents. You have an SCCR and RC subcomponent. The quant side, you have 5 different subcomponents overall. Now, the beauty of this architecture is that if you build a certain ability over here, here, and here, you can predict your verbal score, and the same thing applies to here and here. And if you can really predict your verbal and quant, you can actually estimate your GMAT score. It's very predictable that way. So acing the GMAT isn't rocket science. It's actually very measurable and predictable. And if you measure your improvement, you can actually predict what you're going to get. Now, the key thing over here is that you need to be very systematic in learning. You need to be very systematic in measuring that improvement. And which is what we built. We've spent close to $5 million in R&D in building our technology. And because of this technology, we can track your improvement. An average e-GMATer actually improves by about 75 points on GMAT verbal and 45 points on GMAT quant. And we track this improvement. We give you tools to measure this improvement. Actually, we had a product called GMAT Live Prep in which we guaranteed an improvement better than this. Most of the other prep companies, they don't even offer a guarantee. They don't even give you the tools to track this. But we give you, each one of you, these tools to track this, because that's how we think about architecting our courses in the first place. So when you think about a traditional test prep, it has a very different architecture from how the GMAT's structured. When you join a traditional test prep, what happens is you actually get a bunch of books or you get a bunch of online learning content. 80% of your conceptual learning happens over there. But as I mentioned earlier, there's very little feedback at that learning stages. So you learn this and no one tracks whether you've learned this or not. And then you go to a classroom and 20% of your learning happens in classroom. Now, there are very few good instructors, but even when there is a good instructor, you don't have the tools to measure how well each one of you is learning. And if you have a bad foundation in step number 1 over here, then what you're going to find is that if you have a bad foundation over here, then what you're going to find is that you would struggle over here. Then you go on and take assessments, and that's really, frankly, the first ever exposure to truth is when you get that's the first time you get feedback as to how well you're doing. Now you take a mock test, you get a certain score, and more often than not, the score surprises you. Now, even when that surprises you, you have to figure out what do you do next, because there's very limited integration with the course. And this entire onus of analysis, most of the time, is with the student. How many of you have been through a traditional test prep and have experienced this architecture? By the way, this architecture looks very, very nice when you are over here, when you are over here. But when it comes to this, it seems like you've hit a black box. How many of you have experienced this? Okay. And when you think about how this architecture aligns with that, with the architecture of the test, what you're going to find is that other than the alignment at this top level over here, which is at the mock test level, there's really very little alignment at the grassroots level. I mean, there's no alignment at this level. There's no alignment at this level over here, or even this level. Okay, the true assessment over here just happens at this level. And because you get very little feedback during your preparation stages, what it leads to is many people go through this architecture again and again to get close to their target score. A lot of you end up frustrated and you actually give up and say, hey, maybe GMAT's not my cup of tea. And maybe I'm okay with a 650 score. Maybe I'm okay with a substandard MBA school. When we started e-GMAT, so Payal and I started e-GMAT about 9 years back, and we started with the aim of and our goal today still is to provide an architecture that's as effective as learning with a private tutor, but at a price which is much lower than that. It's similar to that of a book. So we said we've got to build these learning nuggets that give feedback to people, where you have feedback at a concept level, where we teach application while we are teaching you concepts, and where this assessment happens when you learn a bunch of concepts, not when you learn a lot of content. So we created what we call as this integrated learning nuggets, which we call as modules, where you learn a few concepts which are related to one another. You get feedback on that. You learn application of those concepts right then and there. You get feedback on that. And then you have these qualifying exercises, which are progressive in nature, which tell you, how well are you learning. And what you see over here is an example of a subject verb module, and we saw how this feedback's implemented over here. And the whole intent with this was that we align this with the architecture of GMAT, not just at this level over here, but also at the level of modifiers, subject verb, parallelism, and so on and so forth, so that if you do well at these levels, you'll do well at subject verb. If you do well at subject verb, modifiers, parallelism, and comparison, you will do well at SC. And the same architecture is across CR, across RC. And if you do this, you're going to do well over here and do well over here. It was designed to be trackable completely. And the beauty of this is that this architecture allows you to perfect. Because you get to that 90th percentile score not just by knowing the subject verb or the modifiers or parallel lists, but you need to focus on that perfecting. And to perfect, each one of you needs feedback that is specific to you. And we see this all the time. There are some people who would for example, revise our tenses application file twice before they move forward because they need that revision. There are others who would do the same thing with idioms. There are some who would do the same thing with assumption application files. Now, um, why is it that this happens with individuals? Because these are their individual weaknesses, and because they get feedback right then and there, it allows them to revise those portions and perfect them before they move forward. Because if you don't perfect them, I'll tell you what happens. But here's an example of a student who went from a 40th percentile in sentence correction in her first attempt, actually to a 99th percentile in her second attempt. She's actually just starting her MBA at ISB. Her name is Ria. So how do you get to that 720, 740, or 760 score? You get when you follow the right process in which you learn in our concept and application files. You get insights that are personalized to you, and not just through the video lessons, but also through the ability quizzes and Scholarium. And then you personalize your learning right from the very beginning, starting with that study plan, starting with and going towards the fag end through that skill data part, which tells you these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses over here. Now, let me just explain the impact of this personalization. Now, this is just one of the modules. This is the verbs module. Earlier, I saw the subject verb. I showed the subject verb module. Now I'm going to show you the verbs module over here. What you see in this module is a few things. You learn the level 1 concepts. We teach you application of those concepts. Okay. Then you learn the next level of concepts, which are more difficult ones. And then we teach you application of those. Now, let's understand the value of these insights that you get. What you see over here is towards the end, this person scored less on the final quiz. We expect a score of at least 80%. And if you were to figure out why is this guy scoring less over here, you can really point out to the causes right in this dashboard. Verb sequencing is an issue. Application is an issue. Conditional verb is an issue. The reason, had this guy fixed these issues over here, he would not be facing issues at this point. Okay. And that's the power of this. Now, this is just at the verbs practice level. Now, imagine had these issues continued at the sentence correction level, they would have caused much bigger issues. But the beauty of this is, if you just fix this, fix this, fix this, you can go from a 60th percentile in sentence correction to that 90th percentile in just 1 hour. And you can do it while you're learning verbs. So the bottom line is, it's effective not because of just the video lessons, but because of all these other things that integrate and give you feedback. And that personalization of your journey to that 760 score is what helps you get to that achieve that excellence. And when you achieve that excellence, that's when you get those scholarships and those admits. So someone is asking me, how do you contact me? You just write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com if you need help with your study plan or GMAT strategy. I'd be happy to help you get there. With that, we've come to the end of this webinar. Let me share the session PDF with you. As a session PDF, you can really look at it. We'd also be sharing the recording with you in about 8 hours or so. Does using the GMAT score in the second year or third year affect admission to B school or getting scholarships? No, it doesn't. In fact, many students so the last student that we talked about, Ria, who scored a 760 on the GMAT, who improved her sentence correction to the 99th percentile. She took the test during her final year, and she then got an admit from ISB's YLP program, and she since then she's been working for the last 2.5 years, and then I think she'll be joining the program this year. Okay, let me also share the registrations for the next concept, for the next free webinar. So this is where you can go register for the next free webinar. Some of you have been asking for that. So again, we have the number properties webinar as well as the sentence correction webinar next week. What is the weightage of GMAT score in an Ivy League application? So, you know, according to the GMAT, the weightage is about 25%. But remember this, when I look at this question, you're taking that question from a CAT perspective. Um, the US MBA admissions, it works very differently. Your GMAT score has a role, and your application has a role as well, but there's no fixed weightage overall. For some students, your GMAT score actually can have as much as a 50% weight. For others, it can have a 15% weight. And then every school is slightly different in how they look at it, but there's no mathematical formula. So I'll give you a case and example with ISB. One of the things that ISB looks at is evidence of excellence, and one of the proxies that they take as evidence of excellence is your GMAT score. If you have an excellent GMAT score, they say, okay, this person has achieved excellence over here, so that box is tick marked. Now, in that case, your GMAT score is worth as much as 50% of your application. On the other hand, if you have 10 other situations in which you've demonstrated excellence, then your GMAT score doesn't have as high a weight over there at ISB. What is the weightage of GMAT score on Ivy League application? Okay, I think that we already addressed that. Do you have a chance of getting a 730 plus score to submit for an executive program in India for the 2021 session? Well, it just depends on how much effort you can put in, Mohit. So if we know your starting scores, if we know the kind of effort that you can put in, then definitely we can tell you how long will it take you, and if you have that kind of time, then definitely yes. I mean, acing the GMAT isn't rocket science. It's about being methodical. What is the significance of AW and IR on the GMAT? Uh, when you take the test, you get a score out of 800, which is 90% of your GMAT score, and which is what most B schools look at. Now, they want to see a decent AW and IR score, but beyond that, there's very little significance of your AW and IR score on the GMAT. How would I rate Spanish MBA schools in terms of score? IESE is an amazing school, so depends on which schools you want to go to. It just we'll be hosting an IESE webinar. It's actually rated number 2 in Europe. Really good starting salaries, almost similar to what you get from Colombia. So so yeah, I mean, really good. It just depends on which school you want to go to. There's the good schools in every country. They offer really good employment post your MBA. Similarly, in Germany or France for that matter. I mean, HEC and NC are amazing schools. A good score for IESE. So a median score at IESE for an Indian male is about a 720 plus. If you get to a 740, 750, you might be in for a scholarship as well. So we'd be hosting Malvika Arora, who's the admission director of MBA admissions. I was the director of MBA admissions at IESC. I think that webinar is somewhere around the 8th or 9th of September or so. What should be the target score for Indian IT male for 12 years with 12 years work experience? It just depends on what you want to aim for. So different schools have different requirements. So again, which schools are you aiming for? Would determine that target score. If you're going to aim for a Harvard or a Stanford, I would recommend that you aim for a 730 or higher score. What is the weight of GMAT score for ISB? As I mentioned, for an average student, it's about 25%, 20 to 25%. But again, depending on your profile, it could vary. It could be as high as 50%. It could be as low as 15%. Aniket says, any suggestions of people with less co-curricular or no NGO pro bono experience? You don't need an NGO or pro bono experience to get into a B school. I mean, 70% of the students who get there do not have an NGO experience. I had 2 full fellowships. I didn't pay a single penny for my MBA. I had no NGO experience. What uh, a volunt, uh, an NGO or experience does is it's a proxy for an evidence of leadership. What B schools look for is an evidence of leadership. MIM courses in Canada, again, you can't just give me a country and really say, hey, how are courses over there? I mean, Canada sure looks really good. A couple of business schools in Toronto are very good, but then there are also schools that I would not recommend in Canada. So it has to be very, very school specific. You have to understand one school's very different from the other. It's like saying, hey, you have Boston University in Boston and you have MIT in Boston, and you can really say, how is an MBA from Boston? And my answer would be completely different when you're asking about MIT versus when you're asking about Boston University or Boston College. Raj says, is the penalty higher if you do not attempt the last 2 questions than answering them wrong? Yes. For most people, that the answer would be yes. If you're scoring above 630, the answer is yes. If you're scoring below 630, based on how the GMAT's designed, the answer is it's better to leave those questions unattended. What schools would I recommend in Germany? Mannheim is something that I would recommend. Stuttgart is what I would recommend as well, and the University of Berlin. Does an experience of 20 plus years become a bottleneck for admissions? To a certain degree, it does. Um, I think the question really is, if you have 20 years of experience, what are you looking for from an MBA at that point? And that's a very, very important consideration that you have to take into account. I mean, why an MBA after 20 years? How are you going to benefit from it? If you can address that question, it's a really, really important question, then yes, you can get into a full-time MBA program. The other question that you have to figure out is, why not an executive or a part-time MBA program, given that you have 20 years in the industry? But if you answer that question, then you can get admission into a top school. So 2 years ago, it was 2017, 2017, which was when I visited UCLA Anderson for about a day and a half, and we looked at the class profile with the dean over there, and the oldest student who was studying there was 47 years old. So people with 20 plus years of experience do get into top B schools, but they are not the norm. They have to explain themselves. Uh, what's the scholarship at ISB? What's the prerequisite? So ISB has very few scholarships. Let me just say this up front, and I can really share some. So here is a list of scholarships at ISB over here, and what you find when you look at this is there are very few merit-based scholarships which are need-based bid waivers that are there. Um, and you can really look at the numbers and put this in context that that ISB offers admission to about 1,000 students. So and what you really see is this: the merit waivers, only 40 out of them get scholarships, but most of them are need based, or otherwise international diversity and so on and so forth. Suman says, I have 17 years of experience. I'm planning to do an executive MBA and I'm planning to take the test. Will this MBA be an added advantage to my professional career and will I be able to attend recruitment? So Suman, uh, will it be an added advantage? Is something that you need to really ask yourself. That it depends on where you currently are and where what an MBA will add to your overall skill set. Will you be able to attend recruitment? If your MBA is not sponsored by your company, then yes, the answer is yes. So, but if it's a company sponsored MBA, the B school will not allow you to use the recruitment services. What course is right for around 20 years experience? Again, it depends on what you want to do. If you want a career transformation, go for a full-time MBA. If you want to go ahead in the same career, then a part-time or an executive MBA more is something which is much more suited. Remember, again, executive MBA in India and executive MBA outside are two different beasts. Executive MBA in India is is practically a full-time MBA program for people who have experience. And it frankly is, in my opinion, a nice way to make money for people who did not learn business uh, in their careers. But essentially, you're giving them a full-time MBA. An executive MBA in the US is an MBA that is sponsored by your organization. It's a means to get essential executive skills for people who already have a foundation in business. Okay, and that's why in the US, if you want to do a an executive MBA by Wharton or Stanford, they would need that your organization sponsors you. Otherwise, you will not get into an executive MBA in the US. So they're very, very different beasts depending on where you want to go. Balaji says, can you name the top three global schools in the 1 year MBA format with 12 plus years of work, which are worth aspiring for? Balaji, it depends on what you want to do. Again, rankings only tell you one side of the picture. But if you really want names, and again, my preference may be different from someone else's preference, but I would go for INSEAD. I would go for IMD Switzerland, and then I would go for LBS. Those are the top three programs that I would really go for. All of them in Europe. And I would say IMD Switzerland once again, just because it caters to older students. It's just an amazing program for in that 1 year this thing. Omar says, Canada question. Omar, the question is, which your question was, is an MIM program good from Canada? It depends on the schools. If you're going to go for Schulich, if you're going to go for Rotman, yes. But if you're going to go for any XYZ university, my answer would be no. Raj says, after an MBA in India, is it good to take the GRE or GMAT for PhD in the US? Yes, a lot of people do that if that's what you need, and B schools in the US understand that. That people in India do an MBA at a fairly early age, and they need a second MBA or a PhD post that. Kastub says, is a stint of entrepreneurship for 8 to 9 years an asset or a bottleneck for MBA admissions? It's neither an asset nor a bottleneck. It is an opportunity, and I'll say that because what you did was running a shop where you did not grow that business significantly. It's a liability. If, on the other hand, you had a business which in which you did a bunch of exciting things. The business might have failed in the end, but you did a bunch of exciting things and bunch of new things, and you got an opportunity to learn. Then it actually is an excellent asset. So it just depends on how you can communicate that and what you did during that time. Any penalties for preponing or postponing the exam? The outcome does not get to know. Rashmi says, how to utilize Colony once you've exhausted a majority of questions but not still reach the target score. Rashmi, first of all, don't do that. There's just so many questions. You'd really have to be practicing the wrong way if you were to exhaust them all. But if you do, then you can create custom quizzes based on your attempted questions. And you can do what we call as a strategic review of those quizzes to understand where you're faltering. And let me share a video. Let's see, where is my Word doc? Yes. Let me share a video of the strategic review over here. Here is the video. Does higher work experience compensate for a profile with medium lower GMAT score with low extracurricular? No, it doesn't. No, they're two independent things. For 9 years of experience, full-time or executive, again, depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a career change, full-time. If you're looking for a career progression, executive. That's just, it just is as simple as that. Career change, always full-time. You get to learn all the aspects of business. You get to do internships. You get a proper amount of time to mold yourself. Minimum experience you get into a B school, most B schools at least 2 years. What programs would I suggest for a final year undergraduate students with an interest in management? If you want to do a master's in management. Or more. So, and from any good schools. Are there any schools that consider GMAT for the 2-year PGP programs? I think there's a list of schools that we have, but I think Bajaj, Jamnalal Bajaj does. Pretty much all top schools do, other than the IIMs. Yeah. Let me give you an article which is there. If you Google GMAT in India, you'd get to it. But here's an article that you can take a look at. How significant is the GMAT score for one of such as MIM and Dortmund? Very significant. I mean, as significant as it is for the MBA program. Spring or fall admissions at European B schools? Either one, whenever you're ready. I mean, it just depends. There's no one way or the other. The only reason I would recommend spring admissions is because you'd see the spring. You'd see the summers after that, and summers in Europe are just beautiful. But other than that, if you join the fall season, you're gonna see the winter first, which, in my opinion, having lived in Europe for 4 years, is winters aren't as pleasant. GMAT score for a West African aiming for top 10 schools, 740, 750. Do the concepts and quizzes on e-GMAT cover most of the syllabus? They cover all the syllabus, not just most. What's the difference between an MIM versus an MBA? Okay, I think we also have an article on that. You can really read this article. How do you compare a 2-year MBA with a 1-year executive MBA in IIM? ISB actually only has a full-time MBA, and it's a very good MBA program. So a 2-year MBA program, again, for me, it allows you to do those additional internships, and because you do those additional internships, you get that opportunity to do a career change much better. That's my bias for a 2-year MBA. An executive MBA, in my opinion, is primarily for career progression. And a full-time MBA from ISB also is an excellent way to do a career change. But again, I always will have a bias towards a 2-year MBA because of the additional internships that it allows you to do. So that's kind of my thing. But career change at ISB, definitely I've seen a lot of people do that. Career change with executive MBA, I've seen very few people do that. Okay, guys. With that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. It was a pleasure hosting this webinar. Um, I as next steps, make sure you go through the free trial. Make sure you build that foundation, and also attend the free sessions next week. And if you're taking the GMAT, if you need help getting to that 740 750 score, take a look at our courses. They are the shortest way and the most efficient way of getting there. Thank you very much, and study well and have a good day. Again, if you have questions, you can always write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. Just one second, guys. I saw a bunch of questions come in towards the end.